Cassie said she was dog-sitting for a friend. That was all, just a casual, no-drama explanation tossed out while she folded a blanket into her tote and slid a couple of protein bars into the side pocket. "It's just overnight," she said almost apologetically. "They've got this needy golden retriever and I guess nobody else could help." She kissed me on the cheek like she always did, soft, routine, and smiled as if she were doing something noble, not unusual. But that's the thing, Cassie wasn't noble, not like this. I watched her go, ponytail swinging, oversized sweatshirt falling off one shoulder. The same shoulder I used to kiss every morning while she made coffee. She looked over her shoulder as she got to the door and flashed a half smile. "Don't wait up." I didn't plan to, at first, but as soon as the front door closed, I felt that quiet click in my chest, that lock turning, the one that only moves when something doesn't feel right. It wasn't jealousy. I trusted her, at least I thought I did. But it was the way she moved that night. Too calm, too confident, like someone who'd told this story before and was sure she wouldn't be questioned again. She had never mentioned this friend before. And Cassie didn't like dogs. Not really. She said they smelled, that their eyes were too human and made her feel judged. But here she was, suddenly sacrificing a Saturday night to babysit someone's emotional support mutt. I opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and stood there for a moment, staring blankly at the shelves like answers were hidden behind the leftovers. Then I pulled out my phone. She'd scribbled the address on a post-it before leaving. I stared at it. The street name sounded familiar, not from any friend she'd ever talked about, but from somewhere much closer to home. It took me 20 minutes to convince myself to go, not out of suspicion, but because I had to prove myself wrong. I wanted to get there, see the damn dog, wave to her through the window, and laugh at myself all the way home. Instead, I found the house perfectly still. No barking, no porch light, just silence. I pulled over, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment. Then I saw the car parked out front. Derek's car. The one with the dented fender and the dumb novelty plate that said, "It's me." He used to come over all the time, for dinner, drinks, game nights. "Just a friend," she'd said. I stepped out, my sneakers crunching the gravel. I didn't go to the front door. Instead, I walked to the side of the house and looked through the living room window. And there she was, Cassie. Not with a leash, not in the glow of TV light beside a golden retriever, but curled up under a blanket, wearing my old t-shirt pressed against Derek's chest, laughing, comfortable. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Not with that image replaying on loop in my head. Cassie tucked into someone else like she belonged there. Like I hadn't been the one sharing a bed with her every night for the last 12 years. Like everything we'd built, trips, holidays, lazy Sunday mornings, tangled up in each other, had been some kind of background noise to a different song she'd been dancing to when I wasn't looking. But what shook me more than what I saw was how she got away with it. The ease, the preparation, the detail, the dog, the blanket, the address. It hadn't been a rushed lie. It was rehearsed, worn in like a pair of old jeans. That meant it wasn't the first time. When the sun crept in through the blinds, I found myself still on the couch, the beer from the night before half finished and warm on the coffee table. I stared at it like it might explain what the hell was happening to my life. She came back around 8:30 a.m., keys jingling like nothing had changed, makeup wiped off, hair pulled up, looking more like she had a sleepover than a night of dog watching. "Hey babe," she said, her voice sweet, almost too light. "That dog is a maniac. I don't think I slept more than 2 hours. You wouldn't believe the barking." She dropped her bag by the stairs, kissed the top of my head, and made a beeline for the kitchen, yawning on cue. I followed behind her, watching her crack eggs, like she hadn't just cracked open a whole other life. "You know," I started, testing my tone, trying not to sound off. "You never told me your friend's name. The one with the dog?" She paused just a beat too long before answering. "Oh, Michelle. We used to work together a few years ago. You don't know her." She smiled, added some salt to the eggs, and turned her back to me, like the topic was already closed. "Michelle." I repeated the name in my head, rolled it around like a foreign coin, trying to figure out if it was real or counterfeit. I opened my mouth to say something else, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to do? Pull out the photo I took through Derek's window? I hadn't even looked at it since snapping it, afraid of confirming that it hadn't been some twisted trick of the light or a dream my jealousy cooked up in the dark. Instead, I said nothing. I sat at the table, drank my coffee, and tried to play the part of the man who believed his wife. But once doubt settles into your chest, it doesn't leave quietly. That day, I noticed things I hadn't before. The way she kept checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. How she smiled into the screen, then quickly flipped it over if I walked too close. She used to laugh at the idea of putting a passcode on her phone. Now, she had Face ID. When I walked past her bag, I caught a glimpse of the blanket she'd taken. Still folded. Clean. Not a single dog hair on it. And I've been around enough dogs to know you don't leave a house with a golden retriever and come home without a single stray hair stuck to your clothes. I waited until she went upstairs to shower and quietly grabbed the post-it she'd written the address on. The edges were curled like it had been handled often, practiced. I put it in my wallet without thinking, then sat back on the couch and stared at nothing for a long time. I couldn't tell anyone, not yet, not until I knew for sure. My friends would either tell me to leave or tell me I was paranoid. But the thing was, I didn't feel angry yet. I felt invested. Like I was unraveling a puzzle she thought I'd never have the patience to solve. The next day, I drove by Derek's house again. Same car in the driveway. Same curtains pulled halfway closed. I didn't look through the window this time. I didn't need to. I had my proof already. I was just checking, making sure the lie still lined up. I didn't confront her, not yet, because something inside me had shifted. This wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about understanding her, who she'd become, who I'd been sleeping beside, and whether the woman who kissed me goodnight and brought me coffee in the morning had ever really existed. 3 days passed. Each one crawled slower than the last, but every hour sharpened my focus. Cassie hadn't changed a thing about her behavior. If anything, she was more attentive than usual. Little touches on my back when I walked past her, random texts in the middle of the day. Just thinking of you. It would have felt sweet if I didn't already know better. But once you've seen someone's true face, every smile starts to look like a mask. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she nestled into Derek on that couch. It wasn't the betrayal itself that gnawed at me. It was the comfort. That kind of body language doesn't come from a one-time mistake. You don't curl into someone like that unless it's routine, unless your body knows its place beside them. I needed more than suspicion. I needed confirmation, the kind of truth that couldn't be debated or denied. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I didn't want to follow her. That felt too much like something from a bad TV drama. So instead, I turned to what she'd already given me, her phone. Not literally. She guarded that thing like a dragon hoards gold. But we shared a family iCloud account. It was mostly for photo sharing, vacation albums, saved recipes. But it also meant that under the right settings, her location history synced to mine. I logged into the dashboard and stared at the timeline. There it was, plain as day. The same address, Derek Street, popped up multiple times over the last 2 months. Not once, not twice, 7 times. All late at night, always on weekends, always dog-sitting, and I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. The arrogance of it, the confidence that I would never bother to check. She was playing 2 roles at once. The nurturing wife and the sneaky lover. And I had bought the performance until the curtain slipped. I printed out the location logs. I didn't want to rely on screenshots or data that could vanish with a password change. I started a little folder, tucked it behind a row of dusty tax documents in the filing cabinet. Evidence, proof, truth. I also checked our bank statements. Subtle things stood out. A coffee shop near Derek's neighborhood charged at 6:58 a.m. the morning after one of her stays, a gas receipt from a station she never used, the same night she was supposedly just driving a few miles to her friend's place. All of it added up to one conclusion. She had never been where she said she was. Still, part of me wondered, what was this? A full-blown affair? Something recent? Was it emotional or just physical? Or maybe, worst of all, had it started out of boredom? People do stupid things when they get comfortable, or when they feel unseen. But I never thought Cassie would be one of them. The thing was, I had always tried. Always. I wasn't perfect, but I was consistent. Birthdays remembered, anniversaries planned. She never wanted for anything, not love, not time, not comfort. But maybe comfort had become the problem. Maybe it had dulled her desire for something more volatile. Someone like Derek. Derek who lived alone. Derek who'd always been too available. He was the kind of guy who lingered a beat too long in conversations, especially with married women. I used to think it was harmless. I even laughed about it once, told Cassie he had a sad divorce guy energy. She'd smirked, but didn't say much. Now, I wondered how long ago she'd started seeing him as more than a friend. I sat on that thought for a while. That Saturday she said she was headed over again. Same house, she told me. I know it's weird, but the dog gets really stressed if someone isn't there. And Michelle? She's in Portland all week. The lie rolled off her tongue like she'd said it 1,000 times. This time I didn't let her see me react. I nodded, kissed her goodbye, and even offered to pack her a sandwich for the road. She smiled like I was the best husband on earth. Then she left. I waited 10 minutes before I grabbed my keys and headed to the same address. I parked down the street again, angled so no one could see my car from the front of the house. My hands were steady this time. No nerves, just resolve. I took the long way around the block, cutting behind a few backyards until I reached the side of Derek's house. The window I'd looked through days ago still had the same sheer curtain, just thin enough to see movement. I crouched low and inched toward it. There they were. Cassie was sitting cross-legged on the couch, barefoot in leggings and one of my hoodies. Derek was beside her, arm lazily thrown across the back of the couch. A pizza box sat open between them. She laughed at something he said, tossed her head back, the way she used to do with me. Then she leaned into him and kissed his cheek, like it was just another Saturday night at home. But it wasn't her home. It never should have been. I stepped back slowly. I didn't need to see more. I'd seen enough to know who she was now, and more painfully, who I no longer was to her. I stood in the shadow of Derek's house for a long time, long enough for my knees to start aching and my breath to turn shallow. But I didn't feel it. My body was numb. Not from shock, that part was already behind me. This was something else, something colder, the kind of clarity that only shows up when everything that used to make sense finally stops pretending to. Cassie had settled in beside him like she belonged there, like she hadn't spent the last 12 years building a life with me, like she didn't wake up every morning in our bed and kiss me before pouring her coffee. She was draped across Derek like a woman at peace. She didn't look nervous, didn't glance at the window, didn't act like someone who felt guilty. And that was the part that burned the most, how natural it all seemed to her. She wasn't in hiding. She was home. I pulled out my phone. I didn't want to. Something about it felt cheap, low even. But I needed to remember this moment exactly as it was, not just for proof, but for myself. I needed something to look at later, when the temptation to doubt my own memory inevitably crept in. When her voice would get soft, and she'd tell me I was imagining things. When she'd say I misunderstood, I raised the phone, angled it just right, and snapped the photo. It was all there in the frame, her posture, the warmth in her expression, the way Derek's hand rested on her knee like it had always been there. They weren't talking, just sitting, comfortable in silence, the kind of silence you only share with someone who already knows all your stories. I didn't knock. I didn't shout or storm the door or demand an explanation, because I knew that moment wasn't mine to interrupt. Not anymore. I was already the outsider, so I turned away. Back at my car, I sat behind the wheel with the engine off and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked different. Not sad, not furious, just tired, like something had finished inside of me, something important. The ride home was quiet, no music, no thoughts loud enough to hold on to. Just the low hum of the tires and the rising certainty that whatever existed between Cassie and me had already ended long before I saw it with my own eyes. When I walked into the house, everything felt strangely untouched. Her coffee mug from that morning still sat in the sink. Her coat was slung over the chair, and her scent lingered in the hallway, vanilla and something citrusy. For a moment I stood there, wondering how many lies had been told in these walls. How many times I'd said, "I love you," to a woman who was already living somewhere else in her heart. But there wasn't time to mourn. Not now. I walked into our bedroom and opened the closet. I didn't pack in a rush, no rage-fueled stuffing of shirts into a bag. I folded each item carefully. I chose what I needed and left the rest. That was the first real decision I'd made in months. What to take, what to leave. It felt like taking control back from the edge of something that had nearly swallowed me. The last thing I grabbed was the framed photo of us from our anniversary trip to Charleston. We were standing on the dock, the sunset behind us, holding ice cream cones and grinning like idiots. I almost left it, but then I realized I didn't want her rewriting that memory later. I didn't want her to hold on to it and tell herself we were never really happy. We were. Once, I took the photo, put it face down in the suitcase. By the time she texted me, I was already gone. Her message came in just after 11 p.m., like she'd just climbed back into the lie and wanted to tuck it in for the night. Dog was restless all evening, poor thing. Just got home. Miss you. I read it once, twice, then opened the camera roll and attached the photo I'd taken through the window. I typed one line. Hope the dog didn't keep you up. You look pretty comfortable. Then I hit send. 5 minutes passed before the phone rang. Her name lit up the screen, but I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in her voice anymore. Not in her panic. Not in whatever desperate justification she'd string together to try to salvage a version of the truth we could both pretend to live with. No more pretending. I shut off the phone, tossed it into the glove compartment, and kept driving. No destination in mind, just distance. Behind me, she was probably pacing the room, maybe calling again, maybe crying. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. This time, she would be the one waiting by the door. I didn't go back home that night. There was no confrontation, no final argument, no desperate plea to understand why. I had seen all I needed to see, and anything else she could offer, excuses, justifications, half-truths, would only stain what little dignity I had left. Instead, I checked into a modest hotel about an hour outside the city, the kind of place with muted walls, dated decor, and a silence so thick it wrapped around you like a second skin. I didn't even unpack, just dropped my bag by the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for months. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was space. And space was enough for now. I woke up late the next morning to 6 missed calls, 4 voicemails, and a barrage of text messages, all from her. The first ones were innocent, still pretending like nothing was wrong. Hey, you didn't come to bed? Are you out grabbing coffee? Then a shift in tone. Logan, where are you? I'm freaking out. And finally the voice messages. Pleading, cracking, full of that brittle kind of panic that comes only when the lie has finally shattered. But I didn't press play. I didn't need to hear the sound of regret. It was too late for that. For days, I stayed gone. Not hiding, just not participating. I let the silence do the talking. I figured if she needed answers, she could find them in the photo I sent her, the one where her lies wore his arms like they belonged there. What could she possibly say in the aftermath of that image? That it meant nothing? That I misunderstood the context? That she was only resting beside him? Sometimes the most devastating part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the realization that the person you trusted once believed they were clever enough to get away with it. Eventually, she stopped calling. The messages slowed, then stopped altogether. Maybe she realized I wasn't coming back. Maybe she crawled deeper into Derek's arms. Or maybe she sat on the edge of our bed, holding her phone, waiting for a reply that would never come. I didn't care to know. I stayed with a friend for a while, just long enough to recalibrate, to breathe without the weight of pretending. I didn't tell him everything, just that Cassie and I were done and that I needed time. He didn't ask questions. He just handed me a beer and told me the guest room was mine for as long as I needed. Sometimes, that's all you really want from someone. Space, without the pity. In time, I changed my number, canceled the shared credit cards, forwarded her mail to Derek's address where it probably belonged now. I didn't leave a note, didn't announce my departure with some dramatic flourish. The real ending had happened the moment I stood at that window and saw the truth with my own eyes. Everything else was just the slow, quiet process of disappearing. And that's the thing about trust. It rarely ends with screaming. Sometimes it ends in stillness, in the way you pack a bag and walk out the door without slamming it, in the way you say nothing at all, because some betrayals don't deserve a final conversation. Cassie built her comfort on a lie, And in the end, she was left exactly where I found her, wrapped in someone else's arms and nowhere near mine.